one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join us in a moment of silence. Thank you. Start off with the election of a temporary chair to preside over election of chairperson. I'll second. Motion by Taylor, second by Radig to make me the temporary chair. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. I'll move on to preside over the election of chairman, and I will nominate Matthew Ung.
Second.
Motion by Radig, second by Taylor. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
No.
Okay, passes 4-1. I'll move on to election of vice chair unless you want to do that.
You have to go. Thank you. You have to go around the chair 3 times.
I do?
I'll give you your computer, but I might keep this drink.
All right. Dennis, you made it nameplate official?
Yeah, got it right.
Well, I'll briefly say it's always an honor to serve the citizens of Woodbury County, and now again an honor to serve this board. We'll continue to communicate with all of you and hope for a good path forward. You all know how I work. Just want to do a good job. I want to do the right thing. You know I am morally consistent, no matter what anyone outside or within this board and certain members of this board would think about that. My priority will be long-term planning, whether it's in regards to the gravel roads, the jail issue, or our continued commitment to reduce the countywide tax rate to welcome growth. So those are my comments. Now I will preside over item number 4, the election of the vice chairperson. Are there any nominations?
Move Jeremy Taylor.
I'll second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 5 is citizen concerns. Are there any concerns on an item not already addressed on the agenda? Hearing none, item 6, I will move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Second by DeWitt. Hearing no discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Items 7 through 11 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 7 is approval of the minutes of the December 30th meeting. Item 8A is approval of, item 8 contains approval of the appointments of A, the county engineer, Mark Nara. Do you accept this great honor?
Of course.
Item B, the county medical, excuse me?
Glad to continue to serve.
Item B is the county medical examiner, Dr. Julie Briner. Item C is the county weed commissioner, Jared Jepson. Item D is the county official newspapers. These remain the same. And item E is county representation to the 3rd Judicial Department of Correctional Services. I think one time we passed this without a name. But Mr. Potabom, are you still willing to continue in this?
Yes, please.
Does the board have any issue with that? Very well. Item 9 contains the approval of various boards and commissions. A, to the Conservation Board, B, to Siouxland District Board of Health, and C, Commission to Assess Damages. There still remains some vacancies, and we appreciate anyone willing to serve on the Siouxland District Board of Health or the commissions to assess damages. The board office has information on that continues to make that updated list available to anyone that would like to call in. Item 10 for secondary roads contains item A, consideration of resolution authorizing the county engineer to execute certification of completion of work on federal, state aid, and farm-to-market construction during 2020. And item B, consideration of resolution authorizing the county engineer to close roads for construction, maintenance, and emergencies during 2020. And item 11 from the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Taylor has approval of the monthly reports from juvenile detention. Anything we should be aware on that, Mr. Taylor?
No, just I spoke to Ryan and talked about not only having monthly reports as Supervisor Potabom had requested, breaking down each individual Woodbury County resident versus BIA or other counties, as well as a statement of revenues. And he was out for some time, but has agreed that he'll systematically be approving a report to the board each month. So hopefully that is in a format that works for everyone, and we go from there.
Good, thank you. I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
Second?
Second by Radig. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 12 from the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Taylor, is information item. First A, consideration of putting the bond issue referendum until September in order to have a systematic, regular time and better inform the public.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So there's been a good deal of information that we studied during the last year, much of which took place in committee, which was Law Enforcement Center Committee for expansion and otherwise, and believe that we've made information available to the public both by website as well as reporting back to this committee. But I believe that this is something that we need to look at. I reached out to the auditor's office, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's 2 dates that this could be put forward to the public and in which we would vote. One would be, I believe it's January 17th, 46 days ahead for the March election. The other opportunity would then be for September. And though I agree, and I think Keith did a good job of starting to more greatly inform the public in terms of the overall project cost and some of the steps that it would benefit us to take the next 6 months and systematically inform the public, whether that's the second and fourth Tuesday of every month for an hour prior, a calendar of meeting with Rotary clubs, chamber groups, morning coffees, civic organizations, and to really systematically go through. And I just gave some examples of things that could be covered, such as the historical timeline, the steps taken so far, the expansion plan exploration. And each of these that you'll see in your backup tries to answer a question that's been posed. So people saying, well, why not just expand in place where we're at right now? Why not move across the street? What about transportation from the Sioux City PD to where you're at? And so my hope is by doing this that we actually have greater support and that the public doesn't feel like it may otherwise be rushed. I think that they saw the price tag with greater granularity right before Christmas. We'd be voting on this January 17th to put on as a bond referendum. My other worry is that by doing so, if it's not successful the first time, sometimes you get into that doubling down on behalf of the public that may not see the impetus for it. And so rather than just do it right now, I'd rather do it right the first time. And so just thought I'd put this on and open it up. There's no action to be taken today, but I'd like the board to consider that and invite any other thoughts.
Personally, I'm not one to want to put this off. I think our historical timeline shows we have discussed it quite a bit in public session, especially in the last year. And I don't even remember on that timeline how many open meetings we've had in this chamber where we discussed our jail. I think it was close to 20 different items, and that's in like 52 meetings in a year. So we discussed quite a bit over the last year. I know just because the public maybe started paying attention once they heard the numbers, doesn't mean that we haven't been discussing it. January 9th, I'm meeting with the Kiwanis Club. I am going to continue to meet with people, even though I'm not going to be the chairman. It's just something we had discussed that since I had kind of really pushed to start this initiative on this last year, that I would continue to reach out to different social organizations and different local councils and just try to get the information out there as good as possible. Personally, I feel like not only will we have the March 3rd vote, but this March 3rd vote will pass. I just have a feeling that once everyone sees the information, there's no way you can't support it. And of course, there's probably like that 10% of people that vote no to everything and 10% of people that don't believe that jails should exist. So we're not counting on those people for their vote no matter what, but we're going to, I think with the information we have out there, people will be able to make a good decision and support the new jail. It's the best decision for their tax dollars. It's the best decision as far as keeping our officers safe. And quite frankly, it could save us a lot more money in the long run when you look at operational costs at the old jail versus operational costs at the new jail. So that's my position.
I've spoken to Mr. Taylor about this and do appreciate the sentiments of wanting to make sure this is done right. I'm giving it some thought, but I still believe at the moment that the background work that the board has put into this over 3+ years, going from an expansion idea to a modernization idea to finally a build new idea, is the lion's share of the work. That is behind us. There's not much more background work that needs to be done, and anyone that disagrees is free to read the over 800 pages of background material the county has made available on its website. This is something we need to effectively communicate to the public. We do need the media's help. I believe the coverage so far has been good. It's been spread out over a year, so that may be why we feel as a board that there's not as much engagement right now. But going forward, thanks to Mr. Radig and the rest of us, we will have a concerted effort to share what we have studied, and that's all that we can do as a board is really put the position out there for the voters to make an informed decision. This is going to be a critical decision that either way will result in major spending due to the lack of long-term planning that happened in the past. We also need to consider that if such a bond was to pass on either date, that delaying till September will have the effect of increasing the construction costs by potentially up to 10% if it delays it for up to a year. The sticker shock of $49 million would then turn into sticker shock of $55 million. So this is something where past Chair Radig has done a lot of work on this. Chairs before him did a lot of work on this. We met with a committee. I'm not sure personally how many more community leaders and business leaders we can bring into the process and give a tour of the jail that have already shown their interest. There's only so many people that are going to be wanting to get very involved in this process. And so this wasn't a political exercise. We relied on staff that has expertise in the private sector, and we've certainly done our due diligence, and I know no one on the board feels otherwise. But we do have a major task ahead of us to inform the public. And so the other thing I wanted to bring up in response to this was my own reading of the Articles of Incorporation of the authority, and my questions to the county attorney. It seems that this authority that both governments have vested with its own legal authority does have to make this call. And so the board will rely throughout this process very heavily on Supervisor DeWitt. And Mr. Whitman, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, as far as actually setting the date for the election and calling the election, that will be a function of the joint authority. The attorney that drafted the articles of incorporation and who will likely be representing the authority included in the timeline submitting a resolution to both the city council and the board of supervisors concurring with the date of the election. So I don't know that that's technically required by code or not, but that's something that has been that's being contemplated at least by their attorney. But I think you are right in your reading as far as it's the commission that calls the election and would issue the bonds if it gets to that point.
So in other words, this board may endorse, as the city would, a date of the election, but the authority both bodies have unanimously created and empowered would actually make the choice. So Supervisor DeWitt, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, regardless of when we have the bond election, I believe both the board and the jail authority is going to have an enormous amount of work to do in getting the word out to the public. I know that the sheriff's office, I've talked to several of the jailers, there's no question in my mind that we need a new jail. I think, to Mr. Taylor's point, I don't disagree with him that if I had a wish list, it would include another 30 to 45 days rather than the March election, but I kind of think that would be too long, drag out too long, so we don't have that choice. Probably my biggest fear, and this goes along to having the vote earlier rather than later, is that if this bond fails, we're going to be in a bad situation. It's not going to be if, it's going to be when the current jail fails, because it's going to be enormous cost, transportation, among other things. But I think between the Board of Supervisors and the jail authority, we need to do our level best to sell the idea of the bond due to the dire condition of the LEC as it sits. Personally, I don't believe I like to spend taxpayers' money any more than anybody else on this board, but I do think we need to get started ASAP. I think expediency is our only option on this. Again, I'd like to say that we had another 30 to 45 days to work with the public and get our voice, our words, our message out there. But I, for one, am not in support of a September bond issue vote.
And just to go for a little more information, breaking down the math. So anywhere from 3 to 12% higher construction costs next year is anywhere from $1.5 to $6 million more. If you had a 0.5% higher interest rate, that's $7 million more than the life of the loan. If you break that down, that's about $650,000 a year more to pay back over the 20 years. You'd have to have another 23 federal inmates per day to be able to cover those costs. So it doesn't make financial sense to push it back. And that's actually part of the urgency of, why we've had such a quick timeline to get to this point, is that the longer we wait, the more it will cost. And you do want to take advantage of some of the lowest interest rates you've ever seen out there as far as a bonding market for government goes. That gives the taxpayer the best buy when they're buying the new jail. And, we're building a facility that's going to last, more than 40 years. It's going to have the ability to expand. It's going to have some redundancies. It's just going to be safer for those that work in it, and again, safer for the officers that take inmates in and out of there. So that's
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, and so, and if anybody else wants to weigh in, I guess one thing just to think about is I want there to be success in this. I don't know that we've convinced the public that if you asked 10 people out there right now, will this or will this not be a major increase to your taxes? I think that they'd look at the lead in the newspaper article and say, well, this is approximately what it's going to cost me, without understanding the potential revenues, without understanding the greater potential tax increase that could be coming. I do believe you all are right. We've studied it for a long time. I don't know that the public's digested it. And so if it's not successful in March, it will be then in September. And my personal opinion is to do it right, but not right now. And those two options weighing out there, I think you may have success in September. If you don't in March, I don't know that you will in September. So I know this vote isn't today, it's not next week, it'll be in 2 or 3 weeks, but I just think it's something that I want to have you all consider.
Good, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you right from the start, I thought we had an over-aggressive timeline. I really did, and I wish I shared the positively that this is going to pass easily, because in talking to people I don't know that it will. But the other side of it is the group that's been working on this has been very diligent and hardworking to stay to the timeline, and they seem to meet every one of them. And that would tell me that getting the construction started earlier would be well worth the effort. I hope it passes. There's definitely a need for it, but that's my reason for not wanting to go further, even though if you'd asked me this 3 months ago, I would have said, let's delay it. But I think they've done a really good job of sticking with what was set as the timeline and keeping everything moving.
Well, I'll just close it out by saying it's an if not, it's a when not if question as to when the infrastructure within this building is going to need some major spending. One of the comments I get in the public is immediately, why does it cost so many million to do an HVAC repair? I have a brother that can do it for this many thousand. Well, you have to move these prisoners somewhere. You can't just move them out on the street and say, stay here. Although with the sheriff's glares, they may listen to them, I don't know. But this costs money to transfer, to guard, and to house these prisoners. So this is just a design function of the existing jail that people worry we'll get into again, but we will not, because we will have, at some point, there will be a new jail. If it doesn't pass this year, at some point in the decades in the future, this will be a facility that you can add on to, that you don't have to worry about having a public referendum just to fix the air conditioning. And that's what we're dealing with here. So that is why there is this timetable, but at the end of the day, we all realize, we all will respect this is the decision of the public. We just want the public to know that when one of these things does fail, if they don't make the parts for it, we're going to have to find another way, and it may not be the cheapest option. Let's move on to
Kenny's got something to share too.
Mr. Schmitz.
Kenny Schmitz, Building Services. I agree with a lot that's been said by the board, but I also wanted to point out that the deterioration of our current facility is just really one of the major problems, and the other major problem is the inmate population and the lacking of adequate housing thereof. It's one of the other major concerns is that unfortunately our justice system right now is facing weekly questions or weekly meetings on who can we let out. Who can we let out to make room for the others that have to come in? And that, in my mind, and I'm sure others that were included on some of our committees were definitely interested in getting that information to the public, and it creates a safety issue for our community, whether they know it or not. And they're really, I think, probably uninformed at this point about that. And I think that we probably need to try to do a a better job of working with the media, and we do need their assistance in getting that information to our public. Do they care? Does the public care about these inmates that we're housing? No, they don't. They don't care. But what they might care about is the safety of their families if we turn someone loose and they're a reoccurring offender of some sort. So I just wanted to make that comment that we do have more than one issue on the table that the community needs to be concerned with.
Is Dave deputized here?
Not a bad idea.
So, Dave, or somebody from your department, if you want to touch on, somebody says that we're not being honest about the capacity because whenever they call the jail and ask how many people are in there, it might be 225 or 228, and it's not 234. So can you explain why the jail is not at 234 inmates every single day?
Tony Wicker, Sheriff's Office. The reason we're not at 234 is on the weekends, we may go up to 250. People get arrested over the weekend for lesser offenses. They see a judge in the morning, or they bond out themselves and they're released on their own recognizance. So our numbers fluctuate from the 200s to the 240s regularly. The pressure that goes on to the jail staff and the safety of the officers and the inmates is anything above 200, our classification system is not working. What I mean by classification system is we have a gang member that's testifying against another gang member who has a family member in a different section. We have to do our due diligence and keep them separate. And when the beds are so full, it's a constant juggling act to keep somebody that shouldn't be in the same cell with each other, and therefore our fights go up, our assaults on staff, assaults on inmates go up. That's the big thing is I can live with I don't want to live with the 230. It's just playing checkers with the inmates so that the whole facility is as safe as it can be.
And can you explain why, as a taxpayer, they might be concerned about assaults going up in the jail?
Well, we get sued for anything. We're in some lawsuits right now that I can't speak about. Inmates will sue us, and we do our darndest to make sure that we're doing what we can. But if somebody gets assaulted, they could sue us saying we did not do our job in keeping them safe.
So you say, essentially, by having a higher capacity, we kind of reduce that liability and risk right up front.
If we have more space to move somebody, yes, that greatly reduces the risk of what we're doing right now.
Thanks. And I've heard all those answers before. It's just, again, to reiterate to the public or anyone watching exactly why.
I just, if you're all talking about the issue of the election, I wanted to comment on the way that we're planning to conduct this election. So it's not a surprise to you. So I hope you'll weigh in if you have issues with it. But first off, they have limited the dates you can have special elections, and it's to the March date and the September date. You cannot have one on the general election date at this point. Used to be able to do that, but legislature, the way they wrote a reform bill not too long ago, they inadvertently put it so that you can't have a special election, which is a public measure question on with the general election. So what this does do is allow, it lends itself to doing a countywide vote center election. So voters can go to any polling place to cast their ballot, and that it would include the rural area, which we've never done before, but that's what I plan on doing here. But I also, every time I do one of these special elections, I do a mailing to every active registered voter. So there's an opportunity for you to include a fact sheet. You can't advocate for it, yes or no, but it is something that we could include in that information when we send out to voters about the conduct of this election. So if you're concerned with that, please let me know, but this is a perfect opportunity to do that for us. That's what we have advocated at the state level, to use countywide vote centers, including in the general election. We can't do that now, but we can do it in the special election, and that's what I plan on doing if this goes ahead in March. So just want to let you know, and if you're concerned with that, please let me know.
And in addition to any independent activities the board members or other elected officials would like to do on this, I can commit to putting an information item on each agenda every week until this bond is actually held, so that the public is well aware that if there's anyone that would like to ask a question or give their opinion, there is going to be a forum every single week at this board meeting for them to do so, to ask questions. If we can't answer it or someone is absent, we'll get the answer to you. This is just an open invitation, and I think that we've been pretty transparent and will continue to be. So with that, let's move on to item B. Also from Mr. Taylor, I think he has some good ideas on taxpayer protection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this is really an extension of the first item, that in order to have support, not only, and I think this discussion is good, is there the need to inform the public, but also for there to be taxpayer protections. And it's predicated on the idea that there will be revenue from federal inmates. We are looking to potentially, or the board is exploring, build a facility that has a capacity of around 440 when we currently have a capacity of around 234. So the twofold question is why the overage in terms of building, and one of the answers is, well, we want to be able to have adequate space as we grow so that we don't find ourselves in the exact same situation that we find ourselves in right now. The other is that our Goldberg Group Architects has from the very beginning proffered this as a potential to realize revenues from federal inmates that are going to be housed somewhere, irrespective, or immigrations and customs enforcement detainees. So I'd like to make sure that we have that schedule out there of how many federal inmates per year will be potentially realized. I know we have no guarantees, but that is one of the things that the board is potentially putting forward, so that if there is a meeting of those federal inmate levels, the taxes never go up. The 20-year bond is paid for by federal inmates and by ICE detainees. The question that I've heard posed out in the public is, yeah, but what if that doesn't happen? What if you build it and they don't come? Then what? Then it just goes to our levy. And so what I'd like to put forward, and this is an information item today, but is to look at what will the county response be if there are no federal inmates. What is the county response going to be if ICE doesn't come forward with what they are potentially promising? So what you have in front of you is the layout of a taxpayer protection plan. Worked a little bit with Dennis on this. And so item A lays out that this was to utilize revenue schedules and tables with those 200 extra beds at the same amount of staff, because that's another thing that's been raised. If you have so many federal inmates, you're just going to increase staff. You're never really going to be making any money. The design of this, first and foremost, is that you have the same amount of staff based on lines of sight and technology. But if that doesn't happen, then here are some of the provisions that would potentially come into effect. So item B is the board will not obligate any new capital or CIP projects from 2022 to 2030 over $400,000 in any year in which at least 75% of federal or anticipated revenues are not realized. And so currently, Dennis, you can maybe speak to this a little bit, we're obligating about $1 million annually in CIP projects, is that correct?
Correct.
And so by doing this, we keep essentially the same debt service levy, but you are freeing up about $600,000 to be repaid to the general obligation loan rather than to new projects. So what I thought I'd do is just kind of go over each of these and see if there's any thoughts or discussion. Any questions on that? So essentially, this would put a moratorium on future year CIPs above $400,000. The next item is in C. It's CF Industries revenue from 2030 to 2040 and beyond. And I want to make clear this is not utilizing TIF. So this is taking the portion of CF revenue past the secondary roads rebuilding in TIF, and it is utilizing that portion that would come into Woodbury County as a taxing body.
So can I interrupt?
Yep.
So these are the releases from the TIF, and then we get, what, about 40% of that?
Yeah, I actually broke that
41.
down, what percent we do get by fund. I'm a little lower there on that schedule.
Okay, sorry.
Yep. So one of the reasons to go out to 2030 and to 2040 and beyond is because we're getting clear of our investment on the secondary roads, as well as you can see that the releases at that point are somewhere between $2.5 to $4 million. And so what this would be doing is saying, instead of coming up with either new ways of spending with these dollars, or necessarily lowering the tax levy all told, this is like property tax avoidance. We would be using these dollars, and you can see that in 2030 and beyond, we're averaging about 3.2 million. That is greater than the amount that would be paid each year and repaying the bond on the jail. So this is something that even if there was not one federal prisoner, then the amount outstanding would be covered by this revenue. So now we get to the point where we're trying to build a bridge from, let's say, 2021 out to 2030, and you have a second provision of it. So any questions on that one? The next item is gaming revenues are currently $126,000 without obligation. Now, the training center is going to fall off by 2021. That represents an annual expenditure of about $74,000 together. There's $200,000 annually. And these are not dollars that are currently going to property tax relief. The board, I think, has done a good job the last 5 years in investing a significant amount of gaming revenue in order to be able to offset taxes. I didn't want to take away from that, because then you're just robbing Peter to pay Paul on the property tax side. So there's another $200,000. And so with that, we get to a point where there's a gap of about $500,000 to $1 million annually from 2022 to 2030. And there are other provisional triggers that could be realized. For example, a 1% across the board cut on operations would represent approximately $530,000. An operational spending freeze would mean that we could utilize new growth. And I'm not talking about new assessments. I'm talking about if, we actually have TIF releases outside of CF, the city releases TIF, or if there's a new plant that comes into operation.
Your microphone's not working or something?
Just turn it on, sorry. So an operational spending freeze could mean that we could utilize new growth and not rely just on new assessment increases, but on anything that comes that hasn't been realized in revenue. So those are another couple of provisions, and I'd look to this board to see if there's other portions of this that we could add. I think having this in place, I know we can't necessarily obligate or bind a future board, but would be a 5 or 6 part plan to be able to give some assurance to taxpayers that if they did indeed vote on this, whether it was in March or September, that by doing so, it wouldn't necessarily trigger a property tax increase. That this board stands ready to have different components in place to answer the question, what if we build it and they don't come? So those are some opening comments, and I welcome any thoughts that you have. Again, an information item.
Well, I do like the idea and thought of having this out there as a, I guess, alternative or backup plan if federal revenues aren't realized. I think it's great to have on the table so everyone can hear that we have been working not only just to do this jail as effectively as possible, but also, hey, even if nothing comes the way we expected, or if something doesn't come the way we expected, we still have backups and alternatives. So I do like these ideas. I mean, upfront and honestly, I don't really want to have to do any of these things because I fully expect that we're going to have the federal prisoners. Even with our discussions with one of the agencies, they asked if we could take 40 that day when we were asking, if they could commit to giving us a number a year from now. So I honestly think we won't have an issue with needing this, but it's here if we do need it. So that's my comment on that.
I think the county's in a good spot financially to be able to offer more than one, more than two fallbacks, in addition to already having a very low usage of our debt limit. Other entities aren't in the same position we are, and so I think it's a good idea. Anyone else?
I may bring this back to the board as an action item, but I'll frame it in such a way as to explore with our budget analyst and our county attorney's office. How do we put some of this into effect, whether it's by policy or intention, in such a way that doesn't bind a certain board, but at the same time does give the counterweight to the taxpayer to say, I want to hear more than just a good idea or four. I actually want to know that this is going to protect me. So I'll work on that and potentially bring that back.
Will this likely be a resolution then?
Yes.
Okay. And it could even be recast and part of the information materials, Goldberg or who else, or at least endorsed by this board as sort of a roadmap. So.
Thank you.
Hearing nothing else on item 12. Item 13 for information is from Board Administration. Continued discussion on the proposed LEC pertaining to matters of scope, capacity, size, locations, cost, funding, appearance, staffing, and etc. Dennis.
A lot of things. Okay, we did a couple things today, following up with our calendar, which we are a day ahead of our calendar. Conversing with our attorney down Des Moines with Alders, Jason. We have filed with the county recorder, auditor recorder, the article of incorporation. They've been filed this morning with the recorder. Secretary of State, we fast filed that with the Secretary of State and that issue there. The articles are going to be published in the paper this Saturday. So once those are all published, we are going to have a meeting set with the authority probably around the 13th of January. They are working on bylaws for the authority that they'll review and adopt. And they'll also be get a resolution from each council, from the council, Sioux City, and the Board of Supervisors. On the 13th will be the council on their agenda. On the 14th will be on the board agenda to set the date as of March 3rd for the general election. And then after those two are passed, then the authority will take action the following day and certify it to the county auditor. So our plan is the 13th, 14th, and 15th. We'll have a date set. It has to be the auditor by the 17th of January. So it's all being made up now. It should be sent to us here tomorrow or Monday so we can get it on a council agenda and our agenda for the 13th for them and the 14th for us.
I was just thinking with the authority's lengthy list of obligations, it would be good for the third person on that authority, Ron Wick, to be involved in our board meetings and now going forward. So that's an open invitation there. Because if the county and the city obviously disagree on anything, they're the longest standing member of that authority and they're the tiebreaker. So it's important that they be involved and be available. So.
Fortunately, so far, the cooperation with the city, their legal staff, has been very, very good. I think it's a plus for the whole community, county, to see us working together with them. It's going 5-0 votes on everything. They know the needs out there for what we got to do.
Anything on behalf of Larry Goldberg?
No, he is working on a campaign somewhat, because the FA can do that. So he's working on getting information out that will somewhat get the pros and cons of both sides, and eventually he'll recommend which way to go. He can do that as our advisor.
And I've communicated to him how critical that piece of his work is, not to advocate, but to simply display the information. Most importantly, the timeline of the discussions and deliberations the board has undertaken.
Right. And we do have an opinion from our attorney down Des Moines that we cannot spend county money or county property promoting this, but physically, verbally, under freedom of speech, you can promote it for a positive vote.
Yes.
So we can get out and speak up. And I'll attend anything anybody wants me to go to. I've told when we're out visiting with farmers, anytime, any day, 7 days a week. I'll be available, and I know the board will be. So the thing is, get it out. That's all I got.
This isn't for you, Dennis.
Okay.
So I wonder if we could, with the sheriff's office, can we just deconflict one thing? And I think it's important when we're hearing things out in public or objections, just to kind of address things heads on. So I think Keith mentioned something like violent felons or violent offenders are being let out. I think there was a counter.
And I don't know that I said that.
And you may not have.
So I just think that was,
But what I want to do is.
okay,
you know how the truth-
I thought that I never said that.
But you know how the truth lies sometimes in between, right? So that may not be, but could the sheriff or his designee address the fact that there are some folks that may be judged to be out on the street that if we had a greater capacity, does that question make sense, Sheriff?
Dave Drew, Sheriff. I can assure you, the judges aren't going to let any violent offenders out, nor are we. So sometimes people get that maybe out of line. I don't know that Keith said that. I'm not sure. I wasn't listening. But our group does a nice job, the county attorney's office, public defender. Who else is in that? Our staff. Oh, yeah, Department of Corrections and, the public defender. And we meet and try to figure out how to speed up the cases. Like I said earlier, we've done a great job, I think, of having the prison come get the inmates much quicker. Other counties in the area come and drop them all off on that day. We know they're coming. And we could get rid of 20 sometimes. But a few days later, it fills up. But I want to assure the public that we're not letting people out that are a danger to the community. One, the judges would never allow it, nor would we. So, but, you know, is what Tony alluded to was our problem is, and maybe the general public doesn't understand, but it is classification. And the courts are going to require that Jim and John can't be near each other because they're testifying against each other. And there's that issue of when they go to court and that they're sitting there talking to each other about that case. So segregation is a very important part, not only in trials, but in rival issues that may occur. So we're up against a lot of things that are really another one is our health system that we have employed, ACH. We're saving some money, but some of the issues that we keep arising are just not meant for our facility. And so then we end up having those costs go up they're put in the hospital. So there's a lot of issues we're up against. And Kenny reminded us today we have a big issue going on. So we'll be dealing with that and the plumbers and all the other people that are going to try to fix our issue so the judges don't continue to get the overflow.
There are times where, with a greater capacity, that when those decisions are being made of, do we let this person out or not, that it would be,
Go ahead.
Yes, we do not let violent offenders out, but we may have people that could be in jail, but we need space for a violent offender. So that person is now going to be out on a bond when maybe normally they wouldn't be out on a bond. In our Friday meetings, it's a joke, but it's not a joke, is we got nobody to release because they're all in there for violent stuff that like we cannot juggle the ball any longer. So, like Sheriff said, no violent, we'll overstock and we'll ship them to other counties, the violent offenders. It's the, I don't want to say lesser offenses, but the non-violent, the maybe first drug arrest, maybe a second OWI, maybe a lesser assault. That are the things that our jail, if we had space, they'd be in jail, but we don't have space.
you're put in a position to make hard choices that with
Yeah,
greater
it's-
capacity, you otherwise.
The
not
crystal
have to make.
ball.
Is that fair?
Right, oh, that is, and we can't look in the crystal ball and guess how, you don't know, you hope, you know, so, yeah, that'd be where we're at.
Thank you very much. I just think that maybe
Yes.
helpful.
That
And-
distinction was very important because not everyone's a violent offender. So when we say any of us that those issues are being addressed, it's not as if we believe everyone is a violent offender.
Yeah, it certainly didn't help that the local radio station had that information incorrect and ran it for a full day. But the irony of that was the individual, of course, then asking questions in our open meeting had been somebody that was released early at a different point too.
And I just wanted to take this opportunity to express and get the media's assistance with letting the public know that we have over 800 pages of documents, studies, meetings, meeting minutes, that we could talk for hours on at these board meetings. But if they'll go to the Woodbury County website and look under LEC expansion, there are over 800 pages of documents there that they could study to understand why we need a new facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this item? All right, item 14 is reports on committee meetings. I'll begin by mentioning the 2020 committee assignments. Those may not be ready, obviously, by next Tuesday. I wouldn't count on it. So following Tuesday, January 14th, you can expect to see those on the agenda. Obviously, if there's a committee held before that, just keep the status quo and go to the ones that you're previously assigned to. I had kind of a question I wanted to air in regards to those committees as we set those. The jail expansion / new jail committee that we've had for several years. I'm wondering, I don't need an answer necessarily from the board or Mr. Taylor right now, who also serves on that with me, but I'm wondering if we need that going forward, since all of our meetings on this topic will be through the board or through the authority having vested much of the power the committee would have recommended to the board. So is there a desire to kind of blend that into, and give credit to the fact that the board is discussing this almost every week going forward?
Yeah, I think it served a very useful purpose. I think we've captured all the meeting minutes. I do think there's a danger now in some ways, maybe between if we're meeting and then the authority and Supervisor DeWitt's meeting over here, how much crosstalk is there? And if this committee is saying, well, we should go in this direction, and the authority is actually saying, no, we ought to go this way, I think that could lend itself to some confusion. So I guess I'm saying, we could meet on an ad hoc basis to make a recommendation if the authority so chose, but I think to have two of them being competing, I don't know if it makes sense.
Well, is your committee with the current jail? I guess I'm a little bit confused.
So
The committee you're talking about is the current jail?
It was a law enforcement expansion committee, so it was discussing this whole issue.
The idea, though, is outdated because we are not going to expand the existing jail. It's just not economically feasible. So
I guess my thinking was, everything that the jail authority is gonna be looking at is gonna be moving forward. You know, without exception, we're gonna be moving forward on doing our best to get a new jail in place. So, I mean, just my 2 cents, if we got a backup plan on jail expansion or some such, but I'm just gonna say, I don't wanna feel like somebody's getting in our way moving forward on the new jail. That's my only.
I think it makes sense for a year to have a respite from that committee, because that committee helped to close Prairie Hills, transition the kitchen, do everything, and then we ran into the brick wall of HVAC replacement. And so I think we don't reauthorize it. If the authority says, we'd like you all to meet and report back on X, Y, or Z, we could, but I don't think that it's necessary to have an ongoing duplication of lines of it.
Thanks for the input. So that committee will not be reauthorized for next year. I do think it's also important for the whole board to be kept apprised of the discussions taking place instead of having several within the committee and then reporting through Mr. Taylor and myself. So thanks again. If you have your own thoughts, of course, everyone knows, you're free to talk to me about your thoughts on the committee assignments for next year. So this is my open invitation to the other board members, those of you who will talk to me, to get me that input. Item 15, any reports on committees?
Rolling Hills will be having their budget meeting on January 8th. We are looking at some mandated services by which we're going to have to look at and increase utilization of reserves and or levy. So Dennis and I met with Dawn as well as Paul, the chair, for about an hour today. I thought it was a very good meeting, and we'll come back with the way going forward and balancing the mandates with the reality of our fiscal situation.
When will the county board know the tax asking?
I think there'll be greater granularity post January 8th. And that won't be set in stone, but I think we'll have a pretty good idea after that of what's being requested and talked about.
Anyone else? Hearing none. Item 15, citizen concerns once again. And item 16, board concerns.
I did want to say thank you for having me as the chair over the last year. I did enjoy it. I did find out I deal with more anxiety or stress than I thought I ever would. Sorry about all the jokes, and that's all.
They weren't so bad.
No need to apologize, Mr. Radig. Mr. Taylor still has the applause sign under his desk. He can break out any time.
You had jokes?
That's why I had to have the sign.
Well, I don't think so. If it gets out of hand, we'll just address it in the bylaws next year. The schedule for budgets, we had a revision due to the short staffing in the county related to payroll. We will not have a budget hearing next week.
Correct. Plan on having it the next week, the 14th start. We readjusted so we still fit in time frame.
We do have a couple extra weeks compared to last year to finalize the budget. Is that correct?
Yes, we had the 18th. I have to get to the papers after the 18th meeting, but the meeting before that, on the 11th, we'll probably finalize it then. But we do have a kind of a stopgap.
The 11th of
February.
Okay.
Yep. So we're gonna have that day and the 18th if we need it.
But the public hearing to adopt the budget is March 31st.
Right. And we have to have one more hearing before that, March 10th, and this is the new law where we got to show what our general rural basic, and rural supplemental went up by the 2% or higher. We got to show a percentage justified reasons, which will, if we go up, we'll be able to justify it, or if we go down, we do that way too.
Okay. So I know a few of you are gone and in January, so please just get me those dates in case we need to work with other days for budget hearings. I know I'm gone for work a couple Tuesdays in February, and I know others are gone in January. So we'll work around our schedules and make sure that we'll get all these hammered away, but it is helpful to have a couple extra weeks due to legislation. So. Any other board concerns? Thank you as well, Mr. Radig. We have a...
Sorry. Captain Harlow just told me February 4th is a Tuesday.
I believe so.
That is start of our trial, the Molly Tibbetts trial, where they're coming in from, and the judge has ordered that this space will be used to pick the jury. So I don't know if we need to, on the 4th, look for a different space to have this meeting. I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that the judge said we'll be using this area. You guys can fight with him.
You don't think they'll pick it in an hour?
I just wanted to get that on your guys' radar, because he just told me that. So.
February 4th is.
Okay, if someone could advise the board what those times are, then we may just move it in that day if possible. So, thank you. Any other board concerns? Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
Congratulations, sir.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It don't hurt. It's just I'm not supposed to move it.